Welcome to the Injury Law Pod, the podcast that explores and demystifies the complex world of personal injury law. Each week, Missouri personal injury attorney Eric Bartlett dives into the legal issues surrounding personal injury cases to help you understand your rights and options when seeking justice and compensation for personal injuries. So sit back, relax, and let's explore the world of personal injury law together.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 28-year personal injury lawyer, and this is the podcast where we break down everything in the world of personal injury law. We try to simplify, be informative, and make sure that if you or someone you know has a personal injury claim, that you don't make mistakes, you don't let Dr. Evil, which is what I call insurance companies, you don't let them win at this claims process, that you don't make mistakes, that you get the compensation you deserve, and you know what you should be doing at every step of the process. So today we're going to discuss man's best friend. And more specifically, when man's best friend isn't so friendly. Dog bites, dog attacks. See a lot of those. You know, obviously there are a lot of animals running around. People have, I would imagine the majority of people own dogs. And so, you know, with that is the opportunity, the risk, however you want to look at it, for something to happen with a dog. And again, we see it a lot. We currently have quite a few clients with various injuries from dog attacks or dog bites. And so it's not an infrequent situation. And so today we're going to discuss everything a person needs to know if for some reason they are the unlucky recipient of dog aggression. So first off, we just need to talk about, like, what are the scenarios that we generally see where people are getting injured by dogs? And typically we see a couple recurring situations. One that we see a lot is going to be somebody is outside, whether they are in their own yard, whether they are walking down the sidewalk, they're somewhere out in public, lawfully where they have a right to be, and a dog who is unrestrained, not confined, not on a leash, whatever it is, attacks them unprovoked. And it's really weird because we literally see these where somebody is minding their own business and a dog comes out of nowhere and attacks them. And sometimes it's more than one dog. And it can be obviously a very dangerous situation. It can be a very traumatic situation. And so that is one of the situations we see a lot. We also see situations where some dog, again, not restrained, attacks somebody else's pet. And in the melee of that occurring and trying to protect their own pet, the person is attacked by the dog that is after their pet. And so we also see situations where, sadly, a young child may be visiting somebody with their parents. They have a dog, and for whatever reason, again, very likely unprovoked, the dog attacks the kid. And I literally had a case where a lady was watching a child in kind of a home daycare situation. And she put the she put the child downstairs to take a nap on a couch alongside this dog that she owned. She leaves and the dog attacks the child, and sadly attacks the child on his face and really creates a lot of trauma, scarring, some pretty serious injuries. So it can be that situation where somebody's visiting somebody's house or otherwise is in their house or at their backyard, whatever it may be. But that's another scenario that we see. We've even had a situation where a young girl was walking by a car and the car's window was down enough. And as she walked by, a dog literally came out from that window and bit her on the face. And so, it's kind of one of those things where probably anything that you can imagine where people are exposed to dogs, especially dogs that they're not familiar with, there can be a problem. And there can be a dog attack, a dog bite, whatever that looks like. So that's kind of the setup for the kind of cases that we see. People are calling us again. We have people that are just out running, whatever, and here comes a dog. It got loose or wasn't properly restrained. We have situations where we had a mail lady delivering mail, dog busts through the front door, attacks her. Again, not well restrained. So there's just a lot of potential there for dog attacks. So in Missouri, which is generally what I'm talking about, because that's where I am, when we look at responsibility and we look at responsibility and what we call liability, again, who is responsible, we look at obviously who was the owner, possessor, or the law also says the harborer, somebody that was keeping the dog. So we look at who is it that was responsible for this dog? Who is it that was responsible for keeping the dog restrained, keeping the dog confined, doing those things so that it would not cause injury to somebody? And in Missouri, there is no one bite rule. I put that in quotes. And what that means is in some states, a dog owner is not responsible for a dog bite if they've never before displayed aggressive tendencies. So when I say that there's no one bite rule in Missouri, what I mean by that is a person can be responsible for their dog attacking someone, even if that dog has never displayed aggressive tendencies before. Again, in some jurisdictions, if you're injured by someone's dog, you have to show that they had displayed aggressive tendencies prior to this attack. And so that's kind of important because that's a big hurdle a lot of times if you have to show the owner had already experienced some problem with this dog. But now in Missouri, they're basically saying, look, if your dog hurts somebody, you're going to be responsible for that. And we don't care whether it had never acted out before. Now, again, so many times, at least from what I've seen over almost 30 years, dogs that attack people have usually had problems in the past. I guess there's always the chance, right, that this will be the first one. But when we've gotten into lawsuits and we've dug in and we've talked to witnesses and neighbors and things like that, we find out this isn't the dog's first rodeo, the first problem. There's been other problems. I had, crazy enough, I ended up with two separate clients in the same neighborhood at different times that were injured by the same dog. I mean, how crazy is that? And finally, the dog was, well, no longer a problem. But unfortunately, the dog was a problem for two different people. And my first client, obviously, I had helped her. So then she connected me to her neighbor who ended up getting attacked by this dog. So it's really, I mean, mind-boggling. But dogs, again, there's no requirement that there be a prior problem. But most of the time when we see dog attacks, there's a history with the dog. That's how it goes. Now, there is Missouri law that essentially makes it strict liability, meaning you don't have to prove that there was a duty and there was knowledge and all that stuff. If your dog attacks somebody, you're on the hook. We call that strict liability. And there's a Missouri law that specifically talks about that. And I'm just going to read a little portion of that. But basically, Missouri law says this: the owner or possessor of any dog that bites without provocation. Again, provocation is an issue, right? So if you're jacking with a dog and it bites you, then you're probably going to have some fault in this. And especially for this particular Missouri law, it's a big deal. In just general law, under the standard ordinary negligence law, it's going to be a matter of comparative fault. So meaning a jury would be able to look at the injured person's fault in relationship to the dog attack. And it could completely wipe out any recovery the injured person has if, it's shown that the injured person was responsible for causing this dog to attack. Again, in my experience, the majority of cases I've ever seen are all unprovoked attacks. Again, in children, you got to remember this. Obviously, children and dogs can be a problem. Children don't understand the dangerousness of dogs, and they may be handling them in a way that the dog isn't going to like. But again, these are children. They are judged on a different standard when it comes to their fault. And so it's basically the standard of whatever age child they are. So if this is a 5-year-old child and it's shown that, the child was doing something and the dog got mad and attacked him, well, it's going to be comparing the dog's actions to the 5-year-old's responsibility. But in any event, looking at this law, the owner or possessor of any dog that bites without provocation, any person, while such person is on public property or lawfully on private property, so it doesn't matter where you are, right? You can be out at a park, you can be at somebody's house that you were invited to, including the property of the owner or possessor of the dog. And so what does that mean? That means you might be over at your friend's house and the owner of a dog is over there, but it's not their house, and everybody's there lawfully, and the dog attacks you. Well, you've got a claim against the dog owner. So going back to this, that owner or possessor of the dog is strictly liable for damages suffered by persons bitten, regardless of the former viciousness of the dog or the owner's or possessor's knowledge of such viciousness. And that's what I just discussed. Doesn't matter what the owner knew or if the dog had ever acted out before. Owners and possessors of dogs shall also be strictly liable for any damage to property or livestock proximately caused by their dogs. Just a side note. So if dogs get loose, they're running around, whatever that is, cause damage to property, livestock, owner's on the hook. Now, here's the next part. If it is determined that the damaged party had fault in the incident, Any damages owed by the owner or possessor of the biting dog shall be reduced by the same percentage that the damaged party's fault contributed to the incident. So what does all that mean? If you are found 50% at fault for provoking the dog, and just to make math easy, jury awards you $10,000, you're 50% at fault, you're going to get $5,000. It's going to be cut in half. And then also this particular law provides actually criminal remedies against a person that owns a dog that attacks somebody as well. So that is the Missouri statute on this issue. And again, there is just standard negligence that the person, the dog owner, possessor, whatever it is, owed a duty to the person that ended up getting injured. And there was a foreseeable likelihood, right, that the dog might cause injury to the person, and the dog did cause injury to the person, and there were damages that came out of that injury. So you got a couple different ways to hold a dog owner, a dog possessor responsible under Missouri law. And we have to remember, again, if somebody is a quote unquote harborer of the dog. So for example, let's say the owner decided they were going to have a person watch the dog, whatever, and the dog attacks somebody while that person is watching the dog. Now you potentially have two parties to go after for this dog attack. The person that was in charge of the dog at the time and the owner of the dog, both ways. So these are things to keep in mind. Okay, so what about when a dog attack or a dog bite happens? What are steps a person should be taking when that occurs? Well, obviously, depending on the severity of the bite, the attack, we say bite, but again, a full-on attack can be multiple bites, it's not good, right? It can be ripping of skin. It can be really, really bad stuff. There's a difference between puncture wounds and full-on ripping of skin, tearing open, massive damage and injury. And so when all of this happens, number one thing that needs to be done, and probably will be done if this is a serious incident, police are called, animal control is called. And a lot of times, depending on the severity, 911 is going to be called. And that's going to get authorities there. And again, police are probably going to defer investigation to animal control, but police very well may show up on the scene. But this is very important. And here's why. Because you have to figure out who owned the dog. Whose dogs are these? This is crucial in trying to hold somebody responsible. And, a lot of times dogs attack and dogs run off. And it takes some work to figure out where these dogs came from. Now, a lot of times, if this is a neighborhood, people know where those dogs belong and where they should have been. And so narrowing it down becomes a lot simpler. But this is also why it's important that any witnesses, anybody that saw this, whatever, that they're contacted, interviewed, maybe they have knowledge of where these dogs came from. We've had that a lot, where the person attacked didn't really know where the dogs came from, but it just so happened that neighbors knew where these dogs should have been. And then that led authorities to the owners of the dogs. And why is all that crucial? Well, again, because you're trying to figure out who owned the dogs, who was responsible for the dogs at the time of the attack. Because remember, there may be more than one party that you could make a claim against. Again, maybe somebody had a dog out on a dog walk. They were doing this for the owner and the dog got free, whatever. There it is. You got an owner and you got the person that was physically in charge of the dog at the time. And you've got to make sure when the authorities get there that you want the authorities there, because again, they're going to work on getting witness statements, right? Finding out what people saw, what people know about these animals. They're going to, most likely, they're going to quarantine the offending animals, because you got to know about rabies. And they're also going to work with the owner to find out if these animals were up on their vaccinations. Had they had their rabies shots? Because unfortunately, if you can't determine that, the injured person is probably going to have to undergo the series of rabies shots. And it's not great. Prefer not to have to do that. But literally, I've got one right now where unfortunately they were not able to determine the dog status. And so my client had to undergo the rabies shots. And I think, from my understanding, they've gotten a lot better. It used to be that they were in the stomach and there were many of them. And I don't think that's the case now, thank goodness. But I still don't think it's something that anybody is volunteering to have done. Obviously not something anybody's looking to have happen. So that's a really, really crucial thing that must happen. You got to get authorities involved. And honestly, even if it happens at somebody's house that you were invited to, if all that occurs, I'm saying get animal control involved. You won't regret it. You just won't regret it. And obviously, the other big thing that needs to happen after a dog attack, a dog bite, is getting medical care. And most of the time, I don't see it as an issue. Again, you get bitten by a dog. Most people are not going to just be like, oh, it'll get better. I'm not too worried about it. You know, I see in car accidents and things like that, people are hurt, they're sore, they're thinking, well, maybe I'll just work it out, take some ibuprofen. Well, when you're bitten by a dog, and whether it's a puncture wound or worse, more than likely you're going to seek medical attention, because there's a lot of things there. Obviously, there's a high risk of infection. Again, there's the rabies concerns. And again, depending on the severity, you know, stitches and things like that may be needed. So typically speaking, people are going to get medical care, but you absolutely need to make sure you get medical treatment. And then, you know, another big component that people a lot of times don't give themselves enough grace on is the trauma that goes with a dog attack. Listen, this is a traumatic event. When you're attacked by a dog, it's scary. I mean, I've now heard it enough times from clients to get it. I mean, I think any of us that have ever had a dog growl at us or act weird towards us, I mean, we get that is an uncomfortable feeling. And to be actually attacked by a dog and to sustain injury from that dog, it's a very traumatic event. And so if a person is struggling mentally with what has happened, they need to seek the appropriate care for that. And whether that's a psychologist, a counselor of some sort, they need to work through that, because it was a traumatic event and it very well is not going to go away on its own. There's going to be help needed. And that's a big crucial step in the medical care realm. So, okay, how do we get somebody compensated for a dog attack? Okay, so this isn't like a car accident where there's car insurance and, you know, it seems pretty clear, right? The accident happens, you trade insurance coverage, all that stuff. So where does money come from? Well, it comes from possibly 3 different options. If the dog owner owns a home, then there will be most likely a homeowner's insurance policy that will cover this event. Now, what's the exception to that? These days, a lot of insurance companies have started writing exclusions for certain types of dogs. So the pit bull breed, which again, there's always the huge debate on pit bulls and whether they intrinsically as a dog have issues or whether it's the owner, whoever raised them, creates the problems. And I'm not here to get into that. But because of the high number of attacks involving pit bulls, a lot of insurance companies are now writing exceptions in homeowners policies, excluding that type of dog from any coverage. So what does that mean? It's not good, right? If you get attacked by a pit bull terrier type dog, and there are specific breeds that are identified, there very well may be no insurance coverage available on that claim. And that is not good, because unlike automobile insurance coverage, there is no uninsured coverage that you might have on some policy of your own to cover this incident. So you're solely reliant on that dog owner having coverage. And so if there's an exception, that's a problem, because you got to remember this. I've said this before. You cannot count on getting money out of somebody personally. You can get a judgment against the dog owner. You can get a piece of paper that says, it's judge signed, says they owe you money, and they'll go file for bankruptcy. They'll file for bankruptcy and you'll be dismissed out. It'll all go away. Got to have insurance. Insurance is key. What do they say? You can't squeeze blood from a turnip. And you're just not going to get money out of people. They probably don't have the money, for one. And number two, they'll file bankruptcy and discharge out any judgment. So we're really, really, really concerned about insurance when these things happen. So, we go about the process. Typically speaking, right, it's not like a car accident. If people call us, we have to reach out to the dog owner, ask them to turn it over to their homeowner's insurance coverage for further handling. And we hope they do that. And sometimes people want to stick their head in the sand. They don't want to cooperate. And then an only tool we have in the toolbox is a lawsuit. And so we have to file a lawsuit against them. And then generally speaking, at that point, they start going, okay, I guess we're not going to be able to just dodge this. And we're going to have to turn it into our insurance company or otherwise cooperate. Now, what if the person that owns the dog is a renter? Well, you keep your fingers crossed that they have a renter's policy of insurance. And on that renter's policy of insurance, there's a liability provision, liability to others for bodily injury. And it works just like a homeowner's policy. It covers for things like this. And so, unfortunately, probably 6 out of 10 renters, from my experience, do not have any type of insurance coverage. And so when somebody rents a place, it gets harder. Now, there are limited circumstances where a landlord that has a tenant that has a dog that attacks somebody and causes them injury might be responsible. And it all depends on whether the landlord knew about the dog, had knowledge of problems, or the landlord had a prohibition on pets and didn't enforce it, things like that. So sometimes you can look at a different layer if needed to try to find insurance coverage when something like this happens. But it's hard to hold a landlord responsible for a tenant's dog, but it's not impossible. And by the way, on exclusions that are written into these insurance policies for certain breeds of dogs, pit bulls are not the only ones. Rottweilers sometimes, German Shepherds sometimes. There's just these different dog breeds that insurance companies have flagged as potential high risk situations, and they're not willing to cover them. And that stinks, but that's what happens. Now, remember here a few minutes ago, I talked about the young girl that was walking by a car and the dog literally leaped out of the window and bit her face. Well, in that instance, automobile insurance actually came into play because the dog was in the car. And so we actually had the ability to pursue auto insurance in that particular situation. Again, kind of a rare one, but that's what it was. And so you never know, right, where the insurance might come from, but it's crucial to dial that in. And it's crucial to start investigating this sooner rather than later. Again, important things, right? Nailing down witnesses, any evidence that you can get on the dog surrounding the incident. Hey, did any cameras from any ring cameras, front porch cameras capture the incident? Can you get those? Again, authorities being involved can help that effort. But you got to nail down all this evidence, and you don't want to wait because things go away the longer you wait. And again, you need to reach out to the homeowner, the dog owner, to ask them to get that turned into their insurance coverage so that the insurance claim can get set up. That process can begin. The insurance company can do what they want. And a lot of times people are afraid to reach out to the dog owner. And that's why they call a lawyer, because they figure the lawyer will do that for them, and we will. When we sign somebody up as a client on a dog bite, we go to work to figure out who's responsible and, where the insurance is. And so, we just see a lot of different scenarios. And, I talked at the very beginning about this. Right now, I have a lady who 2 dogs came into her yard and attacked and killed her cat. And in the process of her trying to save her cat, she got attacked. And so her cat was killed. She was attacked. Very traumatic situation. And also, this was one of those where didn't know the rabies status on the dogs. So she had to get the rabies shots. She had to have medical attention for her wounds. And just not good. No, it's a very traumatic event in somebody's life to have a dog attack them. And so, hey, as always, I say, hopefully you never find yourself in this situation or know somebody that does. But if you do, now you have the information you need so that you are going about the process of making a claim against the person responsible. You've got all that information you need. And if you feel like you need legal help on it, that's why we're here. I always encourage people to reach out. We're happy to talk with you. No obligation. See what you've got going on. See how we can help. And my other request is always, if you found this podcast useful and informative, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you found it. And until the next episode, be safe and be well.